The gun thing, the main issue with it is something nobody ever discusses. We talk about the technical things. We talk about the gun shows and the waiting times and this and that. And we kind of keep the debate at a policy level, a technical level. What about the main issue? The main issue is, does anybody realize that central governments, authoritarian governments, totalitarian governments throughout history have tried to collect up the guns? Stalin did it. Hitler did it. That when they want to empower a central government that has an eye toward becoming totalitarian, first thing they do is take the weapons away from the people. One of the things the founding fathers wanted, among other things with the Second Amendment, they wanted an armed populace so no king and no dictator could ever take over this country. That's a big reason. It might even be the main reason why people need to be armed. Now, if you listen to the CNN view of the world, there's something terrible about that. They believe, and they want to push this view out there, that somehow Washington and the central government is entitled to a monopoly on force. And the people aren't entitled to be armed. The people would never be entitled to change the government by force. Well, what if this government does something wrong? What if you ever get some kind of a Hitler figure in the system or a Stalin figure? You mean we can't use force against that person and change the government? You bet we can. You bet we can. Thomas Jefferson himself said, paraphrasing, blood must run every 20 years to keep a democracy healthy. I think he was right. Vince, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Do you agree with my opening pitch on guns here?
Do I agree with I don't know if I agree with the whole take. I'd say, I listen, and who knows, I feel like I need to see more evidence to, like, for instance, you mentioned DHS buying up bullets. I have to see more evidence that there's some sort of conspiracy here, but I guess that's the nature of conspiracies, right? That you wouldn't actually have evidence outside of the actual purchasing.
No, well, leaving aside that, that's another issue coming up later. But
okay, cool.
but for now, just looking at my basic thesis, that is, central governments throughout history have tried to buy up guns, collect up guns, force people to turn in their guns whenever they had totalitarian ideas.
Sure. Yeah, and history is rife with examples of that. You're right about that. I think this gun debate can be boiled down into something that's very simple and very accessible, and there's a good reason why gun restrictions shouldn't be put in place, and it's that the people who are supposed to protect you, the police, whatever force, whatever government force is supposed to protect you, can't always be there. And that's very simple. It's just a matter of, we saw a guy we publish from time to time, James O'Keefe. He went around and interviewed cops all across the country recently and asked them, how long does it take to actually get to the location? And it ranged from, well, it could take us 30 minutes to, we're so backed up, we might never get there. That's a problem. And if you're facing an assailant, if you're facing a burglar, if you're facing somebody who's invading your home.
That's a great point. That you have to handle the situation yourself. Let me bounce this off you. This is another thought I've had. See, these are things, this is what we mean by behind the curtain. We have all these things that are never discussed. The big problem with that is you never see that discussed on CNN.
Sure.
When CNN does a gun debate, frankly, even when Fox does a gun debate, they don't talk about things like that. We have television tells us about the technical things, they want to just talk about the gun shows and the waiting periods and all that, but there's so many macro issues, just like what you're bringing up, that's never discussed. Let me ask you this. What about if we have a 9/11? What about if we have something even worse than a 9/11? What if you have, and this is to your point, a breakdown of order for 3 weeks where there are no police and no fire? Wouldn't you need then, isn't that a good reason why you'd need an automatic weapon to defend your family?
I think most people feel that way. And that's something, again, as you mentioned, this is an issue that not a lot of people think about, but these aren't pie-in-the-sky threats. They're realistic threats. As we look at increasingly the threat of cyber attacks happening within the United States, becoming certainly every single day a more realistic threat. If a cyber attack were to take the grid down in any particular location, town, all of a sudden you really are on your own. Our connectivity would go away completely. Everything from access to, most people don't even keep radios anymore with batteries. We're just all using the internet and all sorts of connectivity that goes out. We're all part of sprawling networks. If that were to go away, you certainly would want some sort of capacity to protect yourself and your family, even when the cops are not accessible.
It's so interesting because, in other words, I'm positing a 9/11. I'm thinking I'm fighting the old war. You're talking about the new war. I'm talking about some kind of bomb attack or chemical attack. What you're saying is you might not even need that. What if it's just a cyber attack? That alone could cripple police, fire, because they're all computerized.
Yeah.
Nobody could respond. The whole thing would would become a circus.
It just seems far more likely. I mean, we talk, I don't even, I understand why doomsday scenarios are helpful because they end up, they are good for creating a circumstance where you can talk about the hypotheticals. But these aren't even necessarily doomsday scenarios. We see more and more realistically that there are some scenarios where citizens should be expected to want to protect themselves.
Why is it that when you look at, you would think the left would join us, and this is what I don't understand. Why is it for the right people? Why are the conservatives, people like you and me and Tucker Carlson, why are we out there talking about this? You would think the left would be most concerned about totalitarian governments and Big Brother. I've never understood why this is a right-wing issue. The left should be joining us. Far left should be joining us. They're not.
Well, you did hear problems with totalitarian government and big government and the government overreaching in its power when Bush was in office. This is symptomatic. And by the way, this is a bipartisan issue. When Republicans have a Republican in office, far too often they sit back and allow for the growth of big government. The principles that they supposedly have consistently, they at least allow to sit on the back burner when they have their party in office. The same is true for Democrats, I think, and now you're seeing it, maybe even more so. Now you're seeing it where Democrats will just roll over for the president's agenda, whether or not it actually it fits in with their ideology or protecting civil liberties.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the pedestrian world of politics here in the time remaining. I'm presuming this is dead, that they might only get a small piece. Am I right? Is this thing dead?
Here's what I discovered yesterday. Yesterday on the Daily Caller, we published an exclusive, which, by the way, you mentioned media coverage, got zero mainstream media coverage, tons of coverage on the right. The ACLU has serious concerns about Harry Reid's gun legislation. Look it up. We have it up on the site. It's a detailed account
bless him. Wonderful.
of why the ACLU has issues.
God bless him.
I figured, hey, civil liberties, you know what? I'm going to call the ACLU and see what they think.
Good move.
And they gave me a great answer. So check it out. The truth is, this, I think, will be a huge roadblock for Reid to be able to push this forward now. He was already facing trouble, but now with the ACLU, a famous darling of the left, coming out and saying they have concerns about this gun bill, I don't know how far it can go. We'll see. Mid-April is when Reid
they held back. Now, they were holding back. In other words, the ACLU had concerns all along, but they're trying to play politics and stay with their Democratic friends. Is that...
My sense was that they were pulling their punches a little bit, but not too much. I mean, the fear that the NRA and certainly many conservatives have pushed that a national gun registry could be put in place. When I spoke to them, they said, well, we don't see it immediately in this legislation, but it does seem like a possible second step. And that's a big statement from the ACLU.
Okay, so this thing now without support. So Reid, I mean, the Republicans, my thinking is they could pick up 30 seats in the House, 6, 7 seats. If the Democrats push this much further, I mean, unless I'm missing something, Obama at the State of the Union doubled down. Mm-hmm. He went with guns. If I were he at that time, I'd have pushed this issue to the side because he was already being told by people like Dianne Feinstein that this is a political disaster.
Here's one of the theories that makes this strategy work for the president, which is he doesn't mind if gun legislation dies. He doesn't mind if immigration legislation dies. He wants all these things, right? But the nice thing for him is if these things die, he's going to place the blame for that on Republicans and use it for 2014. His goal is to recapture the House of Representatives. If he can do that, the legislative fights that are going on now will be meaningless. He'll be able to accomplish the legislation that he wants for the rest of his term.
Vince Coglianese, thank you, Vince. The Daily Caller, keep doing your good work. Thank you, Vince.
Thanks so much.